Welcome to Unseen Right, where history isn't read, it's exhumed. Make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss these dark historical mysteries. And tell us in the comments, what state are you listening from? We love hearing from our viewers across America. We begin in the winter of 1876 deep in the Montana Territory. The town of Crow's Landing had no map markers, no rail line, and no reason for strangers to arrive, until one January night, a family of 6 appeared at the edge of town. They called themselves the Donnellys. No wagon, no horses, no visible possessions, just a black iron trunk they never let out of sight. The father, Cormac Donnelly, stood nearly 6.5 feet tall, his eyes pale and almost colorless. His wife, Maeve, spoke with an Irish lilt, but her words carried something heavier than accent. The children, 4 of them, were the real reason people whispered. 2 boys, 2 girls, each with the exact same facial structure. Same height, same gait. Even their laughter was identical. Within days, rumors spread. The Donnellys didn't buy food from the general store. They didn't attend church, and no one saw them sleep. But the real unease began when the town's midwife, Eliza Carr, claimed she had seen one of the daughters, a wife, suffer a deep cut from a broken glass jar. She swore the wound did not bleed, not a drop. The sheriff brushed it off as gossip. But 3 weeks later, the black iron trunk began to rattle loud enough for the neighbors to hear it at night. And the Donnellys began digging in the frozen ground behind their house. By spring, 2 townspeople had vanished, and Cormac Donnelly started visiting homes uninvited, asking for family records. What no one in Crow's Landing realized was that the Donnellys were not building a life here. They were collecting one. By March of 1876, Crow's Landing had learned to avoid the Donnellys. Children were told not to wander near their property. But then came the night Samuel Price went missing. Price was a carpenter, known for his late-night work in his shed. On March 11th, neighbors heard a heavy thud, followed by a sound they couldn't place, like a wooden beam snapping underwater. When they went to check, the shed door was wide open. Samuel's tools were scattered on the floor, but Samuel himself was gone. The next morning, Maeve Donnelly appeared in town for the first time in weeks. Her dress was immaculate, but her boots were caked in frozen mud. She purchased a single item from the general store, a pair of heavy iron shears, the kind used to cut thick rope. She smiled at the shopkeeper but didn't speak. Later that day, Sheriff Elias Dunn stopped by the Donnelly house to ask about Samuel. He found Cormac splitting wood in the yard, barehanded in sub-zero air. The black iron trunk sat on the porch, its lock glinting in the pale light. Dunn asked if they'd seen Samuel. Cormac's reply was slow, deliberate. If a man leaves, maybe he meant to. That night a blizzard rolled in. Through the whiteout, the town's midwife swore she saw Cormac dragging something heavy from the shed to the half-frozen creek behind their house, something wrapped in canvas. When the storm cleared, the creek was iced over again. Samuel Price was never found. By early April, people noticed something else. The Donnelly children, always eerily identical, now seemed taller, and their voices, once high and childlike, had deepened almost overnight. The townsfolk began locking their doors at sundown, but for one woman, it was already too late. The lantern light quivered against the chapel walls, as if the air itself recoiled from what it was being forced to reveal. Sheriff Dalton moved slowly, boots scraping against the cracked tiles of Santa Obscura. His deputy lagged behind, muttering under his breath, refusing to look at the altar. There on the stone slab lay 3 infant cradles, each empty, each lined with yellowed linen. The fabric was stiff, brittle, but stained in places with something that looked too dark to be milk. Beside them, a ledger. The pages were fragile as moth wings, the ink faded but legible. Names, dozens of them. Dates, each one marked with the same Latin word in the final column, translatio. Dalton didn't speak Latin, but Father Miguel, who had guided them into the ruins, froze when his eyes caught the word. He muttered a prayer, his voice shaking, then shut the book and pressed it to his chest like it might bite. They were not baptized, he whispered. They were moved. The deputy finally asked, "Moved where?" But the priest only looked toward the sealed door behind the altar where the hinges had rusted shut. Dalton's gut tightened. The town's stories about the basement had always been dismissed as superstition, a place where unwanted children were hidden away, or where the sisters conducted strange rituals in the dark. But now, the sheriff realized, those weren't campfire tales. They were testimonies. The heat in the chapel grew unbearable, thick and clinging, and both men felt a strange vertigo, as though the walls themselves were leaning inward. Somewhere in the shadows, a faint hum began. It was low, mechanical, impossible for a building abandoned for decades. "Do you hear that?" Dalton asked. The deputy nodded, but his voice cracked when he spoke. "It's coming from under us." Father Miguel backed toward the door, refusing to take another step toward the altar. "You should leave this place," he said. "You have families. You do not want to carry this sound home." Dalton had no intention of leaving, not without knowing what was behind that sealed door. But when his hand touched the corroded metal, a sharp, cold vibration shot through his arm. And then a sound, high and faint like a newborn's cry. Only it wasn't coming from any child. It was coming from inside the walls. Dalton stepped back from the door, his fingers tingling like he'd grabbed a live wire. The deputy swore under his breath. "Sheriff, that's not an echo." The sound, the impossible infant's cry, was clearer now. It rose and fell in uneven breaths, threaded with something else, a faint rhythm, a pulse. Father Miguel crossed himself, eyes fixed on the stone floor. "It is not a child," he said, his voice flat. "It is the memory of one, and memory can be louder than life." Dalton didn't believe in ghosts, but this was no ordinary noise. He pulled his crowbar from his belt. "Help me with this door," he told the deputy. The priest backed farther away. "If you break that seal, you are not opening a room, you are letting it out." The crowbar screeched against the rusted hinges, the sound scraping the chapel air like nails on bone. The first hinge snapped, the second groaned, and then the door shuddered open. The cry stopped. For a moment there was nothing, just the cool, stale air spilling out. Dalton aimed his lantern down the narrow staircase revealed behind the altar. The walls were lined with black stone, damp and uneven. Each step seemed worn deeper in the middle, like thousands of feet had walked this path over many years. The deputy hesitated. "Sheriff, look at the walls." Carved into the stone were shallow alcoves, and in each one rested a small wooden cradle. Dozens of them. No two were the same. Some were cracked, others painted with faded flowers, but every single one was empty. The hum they'd heard above began again, but louder now. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, vibrating in their bones. Dalton forced himself to keep moving down. The air grew colder, sharper, and the smell changed, less like damp stone, more like old metal and burnt oil. Halfway down, the lantern light caught something at the bottom of the stairs. A large, circular frame of iron stood against the far wall. Its surface was covered in etched symbols that seemed to writhe when you looked too long. Inside the frame hung nothing, just air. But it shimmered faintly, like heat waves on a road in summer. Father Miguel's voice floated down the stairs. "Now you see why we sealed it." Dalton stepped closer. That's when he realized the shimmer wasn't just air. It was moving, breathing, and on its next breath, the cry returned, louder than ever. Dalton froze, lantern trembling in his hand. The shimmering surface rippled, like something was pressing against it from the other side. The deputy's voice cracked. "Sheriff, it's pushing through." The cry twisted mid-wail into something almost human, but not quite. A rasping exhale, layered under a baby's voice, as if two throats spoke in the same breath. Father Miguel's footsteps echoed on the stone stairs behind them, slower now, as if each one was taken against his will. "That sound," he said quietly, "is the reason I left this place 20 years ago." Dalton stepped closer, raising the lantern high. The light caught movement, fingers, thin, pale fingers pressing from inside the shimmer, distorting the air like wet cloth pulled from water. They curled, flexed, then vanished back into the nothing. "Not possible," Dalton muttered. "It's not." The air shifted. A sudden rush of wind pulled at their coats, dragging them toward the iron frame. Dust and grit from the floor lifted, swirling in a slow spiral toward the shimmer. The deputy grabbed the railing. "Sheriff, we need to move." But Dalton's eyes locked on the carvings surrounding the frame. They weren't random. They were names, hundreds of them, etched deep, some so worn they were barely legible. And at the bottom, in newer, sharper script, "Miguel Alvarez." Dalton turned to the priest. "You knew this was here." Father Miguel didn't deny it. "We all did. The commune's founders called it the Cradle Gate. They believed souls could be reclaimed, pulled back. But whatever they brought through was not a child. It was a hollow thing, hungry." Before Dalton could press him further, the shimmer pulsed. Once, twice, then it burst outward in a flash of pale light, like moonlight trapped in glass, finally breaking free. The wind became a force, yanking them forward. Dalton slammed the lantern down, its glass shattering, fire spilling across the damp stone. The light didn't touch the shimmer. It bent around it, swallowed whole. Through the rippling air, shapes began to form, not one, but many. Small, hunched silhouettes. Each moved wrong, too fluid, like joints were bending the wrong way. The crying stopped. Silence fell so heavy, it felt like the stone itself was listening. Then from the largest silhouette came a slow, deliberate breath, not of an infant, of something that had learned to sound like one. Dalton realized too late, the door they'd opened was not meant to let anyone in. The first silhouette stepped forward, and the shimmer clung to its outline like a second skin, stretching and peeling away as it crossed. Dalton's instincts screamed to raise his revolver, but his arm felt heavy, as though the air itself resisted the movement. The figure was small, child-sized, but its proportions were wrong. Limbs too long, head tilting with a slow, jerking curiosity. The face was pale, but not with flesh. It was as if it had been carved from candle wax and left too close to a flame. "Stay back," Dalton warned, voice shaking. It didn't react. Instead, it stepped into the lantern's dying light, and that's when Dalton saw the eyes. Not black, not white, just empty, clear as glass, with something faint moving deep inside them, like shapes under ice. The deputy whispered, "Sheriff, there's more." From the shimmer, 5 more emerged. Their cries were no longer human, yet they carried the rhythm of something once familiar. A lullaby, maybe, stripped of warmth and sung through broken teeth. Father Miguel clutched his cross so tightly his knuckles went white. "Don't speak to them," he said. "Don't even let them hear your name." Dalton's heart hammered. "Why?" "Names," Miguel breathed, "are doors." The creatures spread out, their bare feet making no sound on the stone floor. One stopped inches from Dalton, head tilting, nostrils flaring like it was smelling something it liked. Then it smiled. The mouth didn't open the way a mouth should. It split wider and wider, stretching past the limits of bone, revealing not teeth, but dozens of tiny, twitching fingers curling inward, as if beckoning him closer. Dalton stumbled back, boots scraping the stone. The sound was like a signal. The others moved at once, jerking forward in sharp, unnatural bursts. The deputy fired. The gunshot thundered through the chamber, echoing like rolling metal. The nearest creature staggered but didn't fall. It simply straightened, a fresh ripple passing through its form, the wound knitting closed in seconds. Dalton grabbed the deputy's shoulder. "We can't fight them here." Miguel's voice cut through the chaos, urgent and hoarse. "There's another way, through the lower crypt. If we seal the gate from there, we might send them back." Dalton didn't hesitate. "Move!" But as they turned toward the stairs, the shimmer surged again, this time spilling forward, spilling out, as if whatever lay behind it had decided to come through all at once. The chamber filled with the sound of crying, hundreds of voices, none of them alive. The stairwell felt like a tunnel of ice. Every step Dalton and the deputy took was met with a gust of wind that seemed to whisper in tongues, curling around their ears, rattling the lantern fragments. Father Miguel led, muttering prayers under his breath, each syllable thick and heavy like wet lead. At the bottom, The crypt opened into a chamber far larger than it should have been, walls lined with alcoves like a macabre library. The faint shimmer from the upper chamber bled through cracks in the ceiling, spilling ghostly light over the carved stone. Each alcove held a coffin-like box. Most were empty, some splintered, others filled with shapes that shifted and pulsed faintly, too subtle to identify. "Keep moving," Miguel hissed. "We don't have long." Dalton's eyes caught a book resting on a pedestal near the far wall. Its cover was blackened, cracked leather, etched with symbols that twisted and swirled as he looked at them. He picked it up, dust falling like ashes. The pages were filled with diagrams, twisted, impossible anatomy, notes on gestation and rituals. Names were scattered throughout, townspeople, children, even Samuel Price. The deputy's voice trembled. This is why they disappeared. They were experiments, manipulated from birth. Dalton glanced back toward the stairs. The shimmer above was pulsing, spilling shadows into the lower crypt. Shapes pressed against the ceiling, leaning toward them, faceless, yet unmistakably aware. Father Miguel stopped at a larger alcove at the center. He pulled a heavy iron key from his coat, fumbling as he inserted it into the lock. The box creaked open. Inside lay dozens of small, intricately carved dolls, wooden yet eerily lifelike. Faces too detailed, bodies proportioned like children. Dalton's stomach knotted. "These are vessels," Miguel said. "They contain what was taken, the stolen lives, the souls, the echoes of bodies made and remade." Suddenly, a wind stronger than any storm blew through the chamber, extinguishing the remaining lanterns. Dalton felt the walls vibrate, like the crypt itself was breathing. The crying returned. So many layers now, it was impossible to separate one from another. He stumbled backward, the book slipping from his hands. When it hit the floor, the diagrams seemed to writhe as though alive. Shapes began emerging from the alcoves, tiny, hunched, moving with impossible fluidity, their eyes glassy and fixed on him. Dalton grabbed Miguel. "We have to seal it, now!" The priest nodded, chanting, striking the boxes with the iron key. The air thickened, heavy with a metallic scent, the whispers rising into a crescendo. Each figure paused, head tilting, the cries now harmonized into one single unearthly wail that pressed against their minds, clawing at memories and fear alike. Dalton realized this was not just a crypt. It was a machine, a conduit, and whatever had been trapped was learning how to reach beyond. The first figure stepped forward. Its movement was deliberate, almost human, but its form shimmered and shifted, a living distortion of what it once had been. Dalton's blood ran cold. It was no longer a question of escape, it was a question of survival. The crypt seemed to pulse around them, every stone vibrating in rhythm with the echoing hum of the figures. Dalton's boots scraped against the uneven floor as he moved toward the central alcove. The deputy stumbled, eyes wide, sweat dripping down his brow. "Sheriff, I don't know if we can do this," he whispered. Father Miguel steadied himself, hand pressed against the iron key. "If we fail, they do not stay in this place. They will reach the town. You cannot comprehend what they are capable of outside these walls." Dalton clenched his jaw. "Then we have one shot, one chance to end this." The largest figure surged forward again, its movement liquid, unnatural. Dalton swung a lantern fragment, the firelight catching its distorted form, casting grotesque shadows across the walls. It recoiled just long enough for Dalton to press the key into the central lock. Miguel began chanting in a low, guttural Latin, striking the key against the stone floor with rhythmic precision. The metal rang, each strike sending shockwaves through the crypt. The smaller figures skittered backward, their forms flickering, unstable, as if the ritual itself was forcing them to retreat. The hum escalated into a roar inside Dalton's chest. His vision blurred. The cries of the lost, children, townspeople, infants, echoed in layers that no human should ever hear. They were all here. All recorded, all stitched into these aberrations. Dalton slammed his shoulder against the iron frame, trying to hold it steady. The largest figure lashed out, hand striking the metal, and Dalton felt a shock of pain run through his arm. The shimmer wavered violently. Miguel's chanting grew faster, desperate. Sweat poured down his face as he struck the key again and again. Back! Back into the void! The creatures screamed. Or perhaps it was Dalton's mind filling with their memory. Shadows swirled, and the shimmer began collapsing inward, pulling on itself. The coffins and dolls trembled violently, rattling across the floor as if the entire crypt were fighting against the seal. Dalton glanced at the deputy. His face was pale, lips moving in silent prayer. Dalton gritted his teeth and swung the lantern fragment one final time into the largest figure's chest. It collided with a solid resistance, then vanished with a flash, as though swallowed by the collapsing shimmer. The cry abruptly stopped. Silence slammed into the crypt like a physical force, heavy and suffocating. Dalton and the deputy fell to their knees, gasping for breath. Father Miguel let the key fall from his hands. The shimmer had vanished. The alcoves were empty, still lifeless. But the smell, the metallic, burnt scent, lingered. Dalton exhaled, but a chill ran down his spine. He knew what they had done. They had pushed the creatures back, for now. But one thought haunted him as he looked at the cracked, empty alcoves. They had learned. The snow outside Crow's Landing had melted, leaving the town glistening under a pale spring sun. But inside the sheriff's office, Dalton could feel the shadows of the crypt pressing against him. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind through the broken windows, felt like a memory trying to claw its way back. The deputy cleaned his rifle, though neither of them expected to use it again. "Sheriff, do you think they'll come back?" he asked quietly. Dalton didn't answer at first. He stared out the window at the distant hills, where the Donnelly homestead sat like a scar against the land. The house seemed too quiet now, too empty. "They will," he said finally. "Whatever that was in the crypt, it learned from us. It learned fear, hesitation, and weakness, and it remembers the world outside those walls." Word spread quickly of the Donnelly disappearance. Neighbors reported strange lights in the house at night, shadows moving behind frosted windows. Livestock vanished, and small children claimed they had seen pale figures lurking near the creek. Dalton dismissed some of the reports, but the pattern was unmistakable. Something had changed. Father Miguel refused to return to the crypt. "The cradle gate was not meant to be sealed by human hands," he said. "It will awaken again. It will seek its lost." By mid-May, Dalton began noticing oddities in his own home. Doors that had been locked swung open. Objects shifted slightly when he looked away. At first he blamed exhaustion, the lingering adrenaline from the crypt. But one night he heard the whispering, the same layered cries, faint, coming from beneath the floorboards. He rushed down, lantern in hand, only to find the boards undisturbed. No sign of entry, no figure, just the echoes. Then the deputy vanished. No struggle, no trace, as if the shadows themselves had swallowed him whole. Dalton reported it, but the townspeople had begun avoiding him. They whispered of madness, of the curse of the Donnellys, and locked their doors tighter. Dalton began keeping a journal. Every detail from the crypt, every strange occurrence. Each entry ended with the same fear, that the figures were adapting, observing, waiting for the moment to step fully into the world. By July, Crow's Landing was a ghost town compared to the spring. Families left without explanation, stores closed, and the Donnelly homestead loomed empty. Dalton patrolled the streets, knowing, hoping, he could still contain what had been released. But one night, as the wind swept through the hills, he saw movement in the darkness, small, hunched silhouettes, eyes reflecting moonlight, shadows that moved with too much awareness. Dalton's blood ran cold. He realized with horrifying clarity the cradle gate had not been defeated. It had simply begun its next phase. Dalton returned to the Donnelly homestead. Despite every warning, his instincts screamed at him. The house was a skeleton of its former self, windows boarded, paint flaking, the air thick with the metallic scent of decay. But something drew him forward, an invisible pull he could neither resist nor explain. Inside, the floorboards groaned beneath each step. Dust lay thick over everything except one room, the study. Papers were scattered across the floor as if someone, or something, had rifled through them recently. Dalton picked one up. It was a journal, leather-bound, its pages yellowed but surprisingly intact. The handwriting was tight, meticulous, almost obsessive. The first entry made Dalton's stomach twist. Generation after generation we refine the blood. We seek the perfection promised by our ancestors. Each child, each soul, is a vessel. Only the strongest survive. Only those crafted through precision can inherit the world. The following pages detailed horrors Dalton could barely comprehend. Deliberate inbreeding, meticulous selection of traits, and an obsession with preserving what the Donnellys believed was the purest Irish lineage. Names of missing townspeople appeared, their details circled and annotated with cryptic symbols. Dalton stumbled back as he realized the scale of the operation. This wasn't just a family, it was an experiment spanning decades of silent manipulation, grotesque genetic refinement, and a chilling disregard for life itself. One passage made his blood run cold. The children of the crypt are not simply lost. They are collected, transformed, and returned when the time is right. Their memories, their fear, their essence, all feed the next generation. The cradle gate is not a barrier. It is the vessel. Dalton's hands shook. The whispers he had heard in the crypt, the cries, the hums weren't echoes of the dead. They were instructions, memories stitched into living forms, designed to continue the family's work. He realized why the creatures had adapted so quickly, why they had survived exposure to the lantern, why fear had made them stronger. Every interaction, every step in the crypt had been catalogued, analyzed, and internalized. A soft sound behind him made Dalton spin. The study door creaked open on its own. Moonlight revealed a small figure crouched in the corner. Pale, unnaturally still, eyes gleaming with something more than awareness. Dalton froze. He recognized the look, not human curiosity but calculation. And in that instant, he understood the final truth of the Donnelly family. This wasn't just about creating perfection. It was about creating something that could outlast humanity itself. Dalton's pulse thundered in his ears as he stared at the figure, small and still, yet radiating a presence that seemed to fill the entire room. Its eyes followed him with unnerving precision, calculating, recording. Each breath he took felt catalogued, measured, like he was part of some cruel experiment. The shadows shifted in the corners, subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to make Dalton's skin crawl. The air was thick, suffocating, smelling faintly of iron and decay. He realized with a cold certainty that the creatures in the crypt weren't just stalking the outside world. They were studying him, waiting, learning. He moved slowly, careful not to provoke it. "Who are you?" he whispered. His own voice sounded foreign, weak, inadequate against the oppressive silence of the house. The figure tilted its head, a slow, deliberate motion. Then, in a voice both infantile and terrifyingly old, it whispered, "We are what you fear. We are what you cannot stop." Dalton staggered back, heart hammering. Memories of the crypt surged, the shimmer, the cries, the iron key, the pulsing hum, the dolls, the coffins, the journals. Every detail of the Donnelly family's experiments came rushing back. It was no longer hypothetical. He had seen the results. He had felt them. The deputy's voice called from behind, distant and strained, but Dalton couldn't tell if it was real or memory. "Sheriff?" He turned, but the room appeared empty. The walls seemed to breathe now, shadows rippling like water. The figure advanced, moving faster than possible, merging with the darkness, and then separating, always watching, always learning. Dalton's mind raced. He thought of the journals, the systematic inbreeding, the deliberate cruelty spanning generations. Each victim, each child, each soul twisted into a vessel of survival and knowledge. The Cradle Gate hadn't just created monsters. It had engineered intelligence, adaptability, and patience across decades of silent horrors. The figure stopped inches from him. Its face, pale and expressionless, mirrored every fear Dalton had ever tried to bury. "You cannot destroy us," it said, voice echoing in multiple tones, as if layered with dozens of entities at once. "We are the inheritance of blood, memory, and fear. And soon, you will join the experiment." Dalton realized with paralyzing clarity that the creatures weren't just bound to the crypt anymore. They had learned to manipulate, to survive, and they had already infiltrated every corner of his world. And in that instant, he understood the terrifying truth of the Donnelly legacy. This was not a family story. It was a prophecy, and the world outside was only the beginning. Dalton's mind raced as the shadows in the study coalesced, forming shapes that defied logic. The figure before him wasn't alone. Faint outlines of smaller forms emerged from the walls, floor, even ceiling, as if the very house had become a hive of observation. They watched, learning, cataloging his every move. He forced himself to move, stepping toward the fireplace, where an old, soot-stained iron grate hid a narrow tunnel he remembered from the floor plans of the house. It might be their only chance to escape, or to contain the creatures. Each step echoed ominously, and every sound seemed magnified in the oppressive silence. The deputy appeared at his side, eyes wide, trembling. "Sheriff, I think they're multiplying," he stammered. Dalton nodded. He understood. The creatures weren't static. They adapted, replicated, and learned faster than any human could. The family's centuries-long genetic and occult experiments had produced something beyond comprehension, a self-perpetuating intelligence woven from flesh, memory, and terror. Father Miguel appeared behind them, clutching the iron key like a lifeline. "If we cannot seal the Cradle Gate fully, they will escape. They will not stop. Not for years, not for decades. They will spread." Dalton didn't hesitate. "Then we do it now. No second chances." The deputy shone his lantern down the tunnel. Shadows writhed at the edges, reaching, testing. Dalton gritted his teeth and led the way, Miguel close behind. The creatures followed, their forms stretching and compressing, moving with a grotesque, fluid precision. Inside the tunnel, the air grew colder, tighter. The smell of iron and decay intensified, pressing against Dalton's chest like an invisible hand. He struck a match to light the path, and the flickering flame revealed dozens of carvings on the walls, names, dates, crude diagrams, evidence of experiments spanning generations. Each mark throbbed with the legacy of the Donnellys' obsession, a record of lives stolen, twisted and returned as lessons to the Cradle Gate. Dalton pressed forward, heart hammering, until the tunnel widened into a chamber he hadn't expected. A circular stone room, the floor etched with concentric symbols, an altar at the center. The shimmer from the crypt above seemed to pulse faintly here, as if the gate's influence had seeped through the house itself. Miguel began chanting, striking the iron key against the altar, the sound resonating through stone. Dalton could feel the creatures reacting. They shrieked, a sound layered with centuries of memory and anguish. The room shook. Shadows twisted violently. The largest figure emerged, looming above them, eyes like voids of liquid silver. It wasn't just a creature anymore. It was the embodiment of the Donnelly legacy, a fusion of every lost soul, every twisted experiment, every secret suppressed for decades. Dalton knew one thing with terrifying clarity. If they failed here, the world outside would inherit the nightmare. The circular chamber trembled under Dalton's feet as the largest figure loomed above, its limbs stretching impossibly, merging shadow with flesh, memory with malice. The air was thick with the cries of hundreds, maybe thousands, voices stitched together across generations, screaming in unison, yet somehow coherent, calculating. Dalton's ears throbbed, the sound burrowed into his skull. Miguel's chanting intensified, hammering the iron key against the altar in a rhythm that reverberated through stone and bone alike. The deputy pressed himself against the wall, pale and trembling, trying to avoid the pulsing presence that seemed to drain light, hope, and air. Dalton stepped forward, lantern nearly spent, hands shaking. He had seen the journals, the carvings, the meticulous documentation of every life stolen, every trait selected, every soul manipulated over centuries. This was not just a family's obsession. It was the blueprint of something beyond human comprehension, and it had learned. The figure raised its elongated hand, and Dalton felt an almost tangible pressure in his chest, memories not his own flickering across his mind. A child screaming, a mother pleading, a father laughing while the light left someone's eyes. The cradle gate had absorbed them all. They were here now, focused, alive in ways Dalton had only glimpsed. Miguel struck the key again, louder, sharper. The symbols on the floor glowed faintly, a sickly green light that twisted in tandem with the figure's shimmer. Dalton realized the truth. This was not a battle of strength. It was a battle of will, of memory, of fear. They had to resist being consumed. The figure surged forward, and the deputy fired reflexively. The bullets passed through the creature as though through fog, and Dalton braced himself as the shock of the interaction traveled up his arm. The figure's head tilted, studying him, mimicking, learning from his fear, his hesitation. Dalton grabbed the key from Miguel, holding it over the altar. "Focus on the gate, not them," Miguel yelled. "Seal it or everything dies." He struck the key down, chanting with Miguel. The figure writhed, shrieking, forms multiplying and twisting, shadows stretching toward the ceiling, walls and floor. The chamber seemed to collapse in on itself. Dalton's vision blurred. The hum in his chest became a roar. Then a silence so complete it felt like death itself, pressed down. The figure froze mid-motion, its shimmering form tearing at the edges, pulling backward, retreating toward the center of the altar. The glow of the symbols faded, the shadows dissolved, the cries became whispers, then nothing. Dalton gasped, sweat and blood on his hands, staring at the empty room. But when he looked at the altar, a chill ran down his spine. One small carving remained fresh, inked into the stone. Next generation ready. The cradle gate had closed, for now. But Dalton understood, with gut-deep horror, the nightmare was not over. It had only just begun.